I'm Brown, and in this video, I'm going to critique certain aspects of the Shantae games. I know that a lot of people like these games very much, and because of that, I fear that many people will take this as a personal insult against them, which it is not. While I do think it's important to confront the more problematic elements of media we enjoy, I do not mean to imply that you are personally responsible for every shortcoming of a piece of media you like. I also don't mean to imply that you're a bad person if you continue to enjoy these games, even after considering what I have to say. It is possible to acknowledge the shortcomings of a piece of media while still enjoying the overall package. That actually seems necessary to enjoy anything, because all art reflects the society that produced it, so no piece of art is free of sin. The value of critically analyzing the problematic elements of media, in my opinion, lies not in keeping a ledger of good and bad works, but in learning more about the unspoken societal norms and biases, in critically evaluating our own assumptions, and in keeping us from internalizing the bad messages that a work may send. I also want to make it clear that none of what I'm saying here is unique to Shantae, and this series is far from the worst example of these problems. It may even seem like I'm punching down by picking a smaller series from an independent developer when there's so many worse examples of these issues in games, movies, and shows with far more money behind them and a way bigger audience. While I can understand that reasoning, the reason I'm talking about these games is because this is a series that I at least care a little bit about. If I'm going to talk about some wildly problematic anime that I have no connection with whatsoever, I would make a bad video because I wouldn't care as much and I wouldn't know what I was talking about. I also think that it's in some sense more valuable to examine works with some problematic elements than works that are just straight up dumpster fires in every way, because the former category has a much higher chance of sneaking its more insidious messages through unnoticed. With all that said, let's move on to the video. I have always had a bit of a complicated relationship with the Shantae games. On the one hand, I own nearly all of them and I thoroughly enjoyed my time with them. They feel really good to control, they have memorable characters, the music is excellent, and although the writing borders on cringy and memey sometimes, I overall enjoyed the tone and humor of the series. Metroidvania games are also just one of my all-time favorite genres, so it's hard for me to dislike a long-running series of those. While nothing earth-shattering in terms of either game design or story, it's a fun little series that I have a soft spot for. And I really wish that could just be my entire opinion on this series, so that I could just uncomplicatedly enjoy these games. It's not though. This series has some issues that I can't easily overlook. These mostly have to do with the sexualization of female characters in these games. And when I say that, I can feel the anime avatars starting to type their usual responses to statements like that and calling me a prude, so let me be clear. My issue lies not with portraying sexuality in general, or even with portraying characters in a titillating manner. When done right, sexiness in media can be fun or even empowering. I just don't think that sex positivity counts as a blanket excuse towards any and all sexualizations of in particular female characters. The first problem I have with the sexualization in the Shantae games is the incredibly one-sided male gaziness of it all. The game's female characters are far more sexualized than all the other ones. Not only do they show way more skin, but they are also anatomically much more realistically proportioned. Male characters tend to have very cartoony body shapes, far removed from what any real body might look like, while pretty much all of the female characters have all the attributes of a conventionally attractive female body. The female characters also have much more sexualized animations, periodically wiggling their butt or swaying their hips. Some games also do the Metroid thing of giving you a picture of this scantily clad female character upon completion, literally positioning the bodies of these women as a reward for your efforts, an object that you now deserve to ogle at. The series later made some predictably flaccid attempts to address this one-sidedness with a few shirtless guys, like, off the top of my head, one named character and a few identical-looking NPCs. And I'm not saying that this guy ain't hot, but I hope we can all see that hardly balances the scales. We're still left with games that portray a wide range of male body types, but in which women can be one of four things: child, old, fat, or sex object. Now you may think, is it really so bad that this game only sexualizes women? Can the target demo for this game just be people who are into women, and can there just be other games that cater to people with different sexualities? And that line of thinking may seem to check out in theory, but only if you ignore the sexual norms of the culture in which it is released. Media does not exist in a vacuum. It is shaped by cultural norms and helps reinforce those norms. We live in a society that has some very harmful male-centric ideas about sexuality. A lot of our media reinforces the idea that sex is about a woman pleasing a man, and most people, including women, can't help but internalize that message at least a little bit. As a man, I'm obviously not the most qualified person to talk about this, so let me direct you to this video by Mexie, a video that really opened my eyes about how much this shit worms its way into women's heads and warps their view on sexuality and pleasure. So when games like Shantae reinforce those norms, it's not as innocent as it may seem to some people, especially since these games are probably going to be played by a lot of children whose minds are still very malleable. Speaking of kids, what the fuck is this? What is this picture that seemingly only exists to reward the presumed straight male audience with some scantily clothed women to look at, also feature a literal fucking child? This is seriously fucked. Another problem I have with the sexualized portrayal of women in this game is the Orientalist tropes that this sexualization leans so heavily into. The whole idea of the sensual belly-dancing Middle Eastern woman comes from some very inaccurate but pervasive Middle Eastern stereotypes. It basically came about when Western men were not allowed in the harems, and so they started fantasizing about what harem life must be like. The fact that they eventually settled on scantily clad slave babes, as Lindsay Ellis put it, said more about them than about Middle Eastern culture, but the cultural idea stuck around nonetheless. If you'd like to know more about this subject, I would recommend this video by Lindsay Ellis. This stereotype is not just inaccurate, it is also still particularly harmful to Muslims and brown people in the 21st century. Right-wing groups to this day use the image of harem culture to portray Muslim men as quote-unquote coming for our women to instill irrational fears about immigration. And no, I'm not saying that anyone is going to walk away from a Shantae game more xenophobic than when they started playing, but that also doesn't mean portrayals like this have no negative impact at all. They can bolster certain inaccurate perceptions of a culture, which can later make people more susceptible to all kinds of harmful rhetoric. You can imagine that I raised an eyebrow when in the latest Shantae game, Shantae and the Seven Sirens, I came across a town called Armor Town, in which NPCs made a number of jokes about the absurdity and impracticality of female armor in games. You know, the chainmail lingerie you see in a lot of games, while male characters in the same game wear much more realistic suits of armor. It's a bit of a weird trope that says a lot about the assumptions many video game developers, often erroneously, make about their audiences and how they think about women. A little later in the game, the mayor of Armor Town, the Ammo Baron, forces such outfits on Shantae and another main character and puts them in plastic doll containers, literally objectifying them. And the commentary here, while far from groundbreaking, could actually have hit in a game that did not itself eagerly partake in these and similar tropes. But that is not this game. Shantae and the Seven Sirens suffers from all the sexist tropes I described in this video just as much as the other games in the series. Like, this is what the final boss looks like. Releasing this game in 2019 amidst ongoing discussions about the portrayals of women in media, the devs probably felt like they needed to say something about what they had been doing in all these games, but they did it in a way that felt a lot like they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They seemingly didn't want to change anything about how they portrayed women in this series and hoped that pointing out these tropes would suddenly make it okay. It doesn't though. There's a place for satire of course, but a few lines pointing out something kinda shitty you engage in throughout the entire game do not suddenly make all the objectifying portrayals of female characters in the game satirical. If this rambly video can be said to have any message for the developers of Shantae, it's that being conscious of negative messages in your game isn't enough. If anything, that consciousness gives you a duty to change them. The only thing lazy lampshading does is communicate that you know you should be doing better and are just refusing to. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If you like this video, you could help me placate the algorithm by leaving a like or a comment, or maybe even subscribing or watching another video of mine. Thank you.